Hello everyone, it's a pleasure to greet you. My name is Daniel Gomez and in this video we will learn how to build web pages with ASP.NET Core and .vvm. To introduce this topic, let's start by talking about .NET. .NET is an application development framework created by Microsoft. This framework allows you to perform applications of all kinds, from desktop programs to web applications or console programs. .NET is not limited to a single language, but the developer can choose one from several languages such as C# or Visual Basic or even JavaScript. The innovation behind .NET is to integrate all of Microsoft development tools, libraries, languages, technologies, proposals under the same framework that is useful to the developer or the company. In this way, without going outside the context of .NET, the developer is able to build anything or even integrate systems that must work under different execution environments or different deployment devices. In this case, .NET introduces a unified platform in its ecosystem to support building literally anything from desktop applications to video games and cloud applications. Also, using tools and editors such as Visual Studio for Mac, Visual Studio Code, using the command console, or any other development environment can be used with .NET. Alright, in our case, the goal is to use .NET Core to develop web applications with Visual Studio 2019. If we're talking about the tools and controls available for making applications with .NET, there are several tools and applications like the ones we see on the screen. These tools make it easy for you to build applications by using their already established controls and components. For our case, we will use .vvm to construct views on web pages. One concept to consider is about defining the parent Mvvm, that is, the model view model parent. The purpose of this parent is to try to decouple as much as possible from the application logic and the user interface. For this, three parts are handled. As a first point, the model. The model represents the data layer and our business logic, also referred to as the domain object. The model contains the information but never the actions or services that manipulate it. In no case the model has any dependency on the view. On the other hand, the view has the mission to represent the information through the visual elements that compose it. Views in this parent are active, contains behaviors, events, and binding to the data. In the other words, the view is responsible to displaying the data to the end user and allowing the manipulation of the application data. Finally, the view model is the intermediary actor between the model and the view, contains all presentation logic, and behaves like an abstraction of the interface. In the other words, the model view is responsible for implementing view behavior to respond to user actions and for easy exposing model data. One of technologies that implements this parent is .vvm. .vvm is a framework of ASP.NET open source that allows you to create web applications using the model view model parent using C# and HTML. The .vvm goal is to simplify the creation of web applications through its built-in controls such as grid view for table handling, file upload for uploading files, validator control for validation of forms, and other web components. One additional thing to mention is that .vvm is part of the .NET Foundation. This organization aims to improve open source software development and collaboration around the .NET ecosystem. Currently, .NET Foundation already has more 50 projects in which .vvm is included. Alright, now that we've seen all these concepts, let's see what we have to work with .vvm and ASP.NET Core. First, we need the SDK to be able to work with .NET Core. Then, we need a development environment. This may be that one you want, but in this case, the best option is to use Visual Studio 2019. In this tool, we will need the ASP.NET and web development workload. Finally, we will need the .vvm extension for Visual Studio 2019, which we can find in the marketplace of this tool. With this in mind, now let's move on to the practical part. In this case study, we will learn how to build a small website for managing student information through ASP.NET Core and .vvm. In this case, to handle the ID, first name, last name, enrollment date, and about of a student through CRUD operations, create, read, update, and delete. Considering the model view model parent, within Visual Studio we will have 3 projects. For the model part of this parent, we will have 2 projects in ASP.NET Core to handle the data access layer, and another to work with application logic. For views and view models, we will have a project with .vvm. Within Visual Studio, we already have established the first 2 projects, which correspond to the management of the data and the corresponding operations. On the one hand, we have the data access layer project in which we have the relationship of the features in the database. We have a student entity with its first name, last name, about, and enrollment date parameters. We have the DB context, which has the necessary configuration to connect to the database. If we look here, we have a configuration method where the connection string to the database is located. In this case, the string should not go this way. We will see later in the .vvm project how to set it. Also, if we look here, we refer to the student entity, this class and the database columns. This is about the data access layer project. On the other hand, we have the business project layer where we have 2 parts. In the first part, the models, which represent the information that we want to display at a web interface level. First, we want to visualize the detail of a student. In this case, we will show their ID, first name, and last name. In fact, everything. And here, we have the label that refers to these attributes should be required when inserting information. In this other part, we have the student list model, which we will use when generating a list only with the student's ID, first name, and last name. Also, within this project, we have the services that perform the data operation on the student entity. On the one hand, we refer to the student DB context for access to the corresponding data, and we have some methods to handle this data. On the one hand, get all students to get a list of all students who registered in the database. On the other hand, get a student per ID by having as a parameter as a student their ID and getting a student detail model. As we saw earlier, also a method to update this information when to insert and when to delete. If you want to visualize in detail how to generate these projects, the data access layer and the logical layer of the application, at the video description you'll be able to access a tutorial on how to create it step by step. Now we will create a .vvm project to create the web pages. To do this, we go to the solution and add a new project. Since we are working on .NET, let's look for a project of type .vvm web application. In this case, we have 3 types of projects, but the one we are interested in is the .NET Core type. I name it PL, referencing the presentation layer. When we try to create a project, the .vvm wizard will show you previous configuration that we can consider. For example, adding styles and scripts as resources, or add premium components such as .vvm Business Pack or Bootstrap for .vvm. In this case, we will leave it and it's for ourselves to make the configurations. Okay? We create a project. In this section, we have 2 parts. On one side are the views and the view models, also the configuration files. So, to start, the first thing we will do is set the connection string correctly, as we saw earlier. To do this, as the first point, we will set that is project.vvm as the main. And we will add a new configuration file. Within the file, we will define a variable for the connection strings. Here we'll create an attribute called default connection. Here we will look for the connection string that we have in the data access layer project in the DB context. This string. The connection of this method will be left empty. And we paste the connection string here. Now what remains is to associate the configuration file in the project startup. As a first point, we will define a configuration attribute. And then we'll generate a constructor. Inside the constructor, here we are going to associate the file we just created, the appsettings.json file. Now, within the configuration file, we are going to associate the connection string we have in the attribute we just created in the DB context. For this, in this project, we must refer to the other two projects. First, because we are going to use the DB context of the data access layer, and DL because we are going to use the services. Then we give it an OK and return to our startup. Here we add the DB context service. One important thing to mention is the database we are working is with SQL Server. If it were MySQL, MongoDB, or some other, we would only change here, depending on the database manager that we are using. Here we write the DB context class. And in this section, here we refer to the default connection that we have defined in the JSON file. Within this, we will have specified the connection to the database in a correlate way in relation to the string that allows the connection to be made. Now, since we're here, we also need to reference the services we have implemented in the business layer, in this case to the student service. For this, we add a similar statement. Now, our .vvm project is fully configured, and we can now proceed with the design of the forms for handling student data through the views and view models. To verify that the full process that we have done so far is in the correct way, we will run the project. With this result, we see that everything is correct. So far here, we see how the .vvm Hello World template has been shown for the website design. Okay, the first thing we will do is specify our own CSS Style Source. These styles or any other media element will be located in a www root folder within the main project. In this case, we will specify our own styles. To do this, we will go to the www root folder and here we will paste our CSS files. Now, we need to specify this file to our project. In this case, as in a .NET Core project, we have the .vvm startup file to the initial .vvm configurations. Here is how the styles that we previously set are specified. In this case, we are only interested in the setting, the CSS file we just specified. The rest we can eliminate. These settings must now be specified on the project home web page. To do this, we will go to the views part, and here we see two files in the master page that corresponds to the principal page, and then we already have the other pages, the shield pages that in this case refer to the default. So, in the master page, here we have the base format of a page in HTML, the header, the body, and in this case of the header, here we have a title, student app, and here we have the required resource called styles, which is defined in the resource record of the initial .vvm configuration. Our project we already referenced to those styles in the body part. Here we see how we have a content placeholder. This is where all the child pages are going to load their content. And for example, if we want to have a logo on our page or show some information on all the child pages, we can place it here. If we go to the default.html file, here we find the main page of the project. And if you look here on the master page, here we are specifying that the master page will be that one that is located in the view folder and in the master page.master file. But we will delete all of this, and here as the first point we want is to view the general list of students who are registered in the database. Now, remembering the concept of model view model, we have the view models in this section. Here we see an attribute that has hello world content, which is what we initially visualized. We eliminate these two. And here we're going to create an instance of student service as specified in the logical business layer. In the constructor, we refer to the student service. Now, let's define a collection to have the list of students. And this list will be of type student list model, depending on the model for the representation of the information specified in the business layer. Now, we will refer to the per-render method, which will set the student data, load it for them to be viewed a web page. Next, we will proceed to establish the design of the corresponding web page. This within default.html. On this page, we will have a header showing that we refer to a list of students, and then we will have a table with the corresponding students. In this case, we will use .vvm controls to set certain elements at the interface level, such as the topic of bindings, tables, buttons, and issues, so they are handled within the forms. The first element we will use is called root link, which allows you to create links to target other pages. The first will be to direct use to a page to create a new student. Now we will create a grid view to set a table, and here load the list of students. The data source will be the list of students, and let's remember that we had defined a collection called students. We then specify the columns in this table. The first will be for the student's first name. The next column for the last name. And then we will set a template so that each record, that is, in each row, we can either edit or view the detail of this record. And in these special cells, we can define other links. We can also send parameters in these links. Finally, we may display a message in case there are no records in the database as to the students. For this, we can use the tag in column data template. With this, our homepage is created and we will see something like this. In this section, we can find a title of the page, the button to add a new student, and in this case, there are no registered students. So now we will proceed with the implementation of the page to add a new student. In this section, we will create a new folder for CRUD operations, specifically for create, update, and detail pages. In this folder, we will right-click and add a page. This one we will call create. Here we specify where we want to create our view model. Then here we identify as create view model, and this will be located in the view models folder and in a new one that we will be called CRUD, as is the one we are specifying now. Also, this page was embedded in the master page that we defined earlier. Here we can specify it and then we put in OK. So, as we see, here we already have our view and the corresponding view model. Now, we will have to invoke the student service to create a new student. Then, we will define a student detail model which will allow you to set an object for the data that the user enters through the web page. This new object is initialized by the enrollment date attribute with the current system date. Finally, we will define a student method which through a button from the website, we will be able to add a new student in the database and redirect to the home page. Now, in the view, we will create a form to be able to enter the data corresponding to the student. Within the page, we can return to the home page in case we want to go back. The first element we will create is a text box to be able to enter the first name of a student. We will also use a control called validator to verify that the text box is not empty at the time of registering the user. This is where we will enter the text box control. For the last name attribute, we will have a text box control, the same way. Now, for the enrollment dates attribute, we were also going to use a validator to see that the date has been entered correctly, and we were going to use a control of type text box. Likewise here. The difference is that the value will be of type datetime. For the about attribute, we will also use a text box type control, with the difference that this will be of a type multiline. This is a text area that we normally see in the HTML tags for web forms. Then, likewise, as the first point we will have a validator and then the corresponding text box. Finally, we will have a button that will allow you use this form. In this case, we will use a control code button. And so, we will use the method we implemented in the view model to add a new student. And that's it. With this, we have implemented the website for the entry form of a new student. The result is like what we can see on the screen. Here, we can see, for example, that go back to return to the home page. Here are the text boxes for the first name, last name, enrollment date, and about. The add button is also here. Now, for the corresponding detail view, let's proceed in the same way. On the CRUD folder of the views, we will create a new item. This page, we will name it as detail. Here we refer to the student service, and the main purpose of this page will be to display the detail of a specific student and provide the options to edit or delete this record. In this case, we will implement two more methods. With this, we have the detailed view model ready. Now, all we need is to have the view. In this section, we will have very similar components of the create page. Only instead of having text boxes, all we will do is display the attributes values of the student object. In this first part, we will have a route link to return to the home page and a section for the corresponding attributes. Here we put the title and then the attributes values. On the one hand, the first name, the last name, enrollment date, and about attribute. Finally, we will put a section with two buttons. The first to eliminate a student and the second to modify it. On the one hand, we will have a link to go to a edit page and in the other hand the button to delete the student according to the method that we implement in the view model. Okay? To finish the implementation of CRUD operations, we only need the page to edit. In the view model, like the others, we refer to the student service. And here, we will also have a student detail model. The goal is to upload a student by their ID and implement a method to save the corresponding changes. So, for this, we have the preRender method in which we load the student. And then we have the edit student method. In this case, the student service will be invoked to update the student, and we will go to the detail page where we can see the student that has been updated. Now, in the view, we will also have text boxes for each of the attributes. The first name, last name, enrollment date, and about. Until this point, the page looks like the creation page. In this case, all we will have as an additional point is that we're going to add a button to save the changes that are made. For this purpose, we will use the .vvm button control, and we also refer to the method implemented in the view model editStudent for student update. Very well. With this, we will have almost everything ready in our project. Now, all we need is to configure the routes of the .vvm pages. Each page must be registered in a route table. For this, we will go to the .vvm startup file, and here we can find a specific method for configuring these routes. In this case, default page already configured. If we see the default page here, there are a few parameters that are handled in these statements. The first argument specifies the name of the path. The second argument is the link of the page. In this case, it is empty since default is the home page. The location of the file is then specified in a third argument. The same will be done for the case of create, edit, and detail pages. With this, our project is ready, and now we can proceed with its execution to see what we have implemented. To simplify the use of this application, let's first add two records. Now, let's look at a detail of one of these. Very well, to update this record, we will add an about. In this case, we go back to the detail and see how the record has been updated. If we go back to the list in general again and see the detail of another record, this time we will delete this student. Finally, here we can see what records are in the database for the management of a student information. Alright, with this we are getting to the end of this video. I hope you like it. In general, we have seen how we can build application with ASP.NET Core and using DotVVM to design web pages through the model view model parent in a quickly and easy way. In the description of the video, you can find some additional resources such as tutorial articles to continue acquiring knowledge in this area and the source code of the example that we've used in this video. Again, I hope you really like this presentation. My name is Daniel Gomez. On social media, you can find me as Daniel Gomez to interact and find some other resources and that to mention. Thank you so much for watching. See you in an upcoming video. Bye bye.